Okay, so today we're going to be talking about load versus capacity, and it's why injury happens and the different factors that can cause injury. So we're always going to start with the dotted line, which is going to represent the capacity line. So this line can move, but right now it's going to stay where it is. So the capacity line is what your body can handle. If you go over the capacity line, then we have a problem. So a problem would be potential for injury. If we stay under the line, no problem, no pain, no injury, no problem. We're going to have different factors leading up to reach the capacity line. So everybody's going to have different capacities, or loads is what we'll call them, depending on their life. Okay. So the first load that we have at the bottom, everybody's going to have this. It's going to be anatomical dysfunction. So anatomical dysfunction could be how somebody was born, whether that's differences in your hip sockets, or if you have scoliosis, anything going on with your joints or your tendons or your muscles, anything anatomically. So anatomical dysfunction is going to be the first box. The second box on top of that is going to be the recovery box. And I'll get to why this box is really important, but this recovery box is going to be really important when working with your clients. Inside your recovery box, you have three main components. You have stress, sleep, and diet. I'm going to put a star in this box, and I'm going to come back to it. But this box, your client has the most control over. The box on top of that is going to be, I want to make sure I write it right, functional diagnosis. So functional diagnosis would be any findings in your joint-by-joint assessment or your movement screen. So that could be limited shoulder flexion, or that could be whatever sensation your client is feeling in standing lumbo-pelvic flexion, or you notice that they have a significant strength balance when you do your impairment, when you do your strength balance testing with them. So as you notice, these are loads that are happening before we even get out of bed in the morning. We haven't even started our day. So we have a few more loads. So everybody has a home life, whether that be whatever's going on in your relationships with those in your life, your children, your finances, anything going on outside of work, outside of the gym. The next one is going to be I should have made this a little bit bigger, is going to be your work life. So for example, like I mentioned earlier, these loads are going to be different sizes depending on the individual. So for example, if you have a client who is 40 years old, married with 3 kids, wakes up at 6 a.m., slams a cup of coffee, commutes to the city, works at a desk all day, and then comes home to come to the gym, his stress level may be different than, say, a 23-year-old who is maybe working a part-time job, has a routine in the morning, tracks their nutrition and their water intake, and does mindful meditation. So you can kind of see the difference there. Their loads are going to be much different. So we don't have much room before we get to our capacity line. So I'm going to go back and use the example of the 48-year-old man. So say his anatomical dysfunction, say he's got problems with his hip and problem with his knees. And let's just say he has a very high stress job. He runs off of 5 hours of sleep, and his diet is coffee. He skips lunch, he has a coffee, he gets a lot of takeout when he's on the go. You find in his assessment that he has a lot of limiting factors, so you have to do a lot of corrective work. His home life and his work life, he gets to the gym, you do your warm up with him, and then say you work on some unilateral movements, lunging. So you do some lunges with him. We'll call him Daniel. Daniel, how you feeling? All right, I feel good. My knee's kind of bothering me. Then you go into some other work with him. We'll say we do some presses, some upper body presses. Okay, his knee's still bothering him a little bit. Maybe his back is starting to bother him. And then you guys go into kettlebell swings. This is where injury would happen. So I know we've heard of maybe people going to the doctor, or they're like, oh yeah, I can't do kettlebell swings anymore. I can't do burpees anymore because that's how I got injured. Doesn't necessarily mean this is what broke the straw that broke the camel's back. It could be a lot of other things going on in his life. So that's where having these conversations with our clients, and that's why I started this box, going back to recovery, because when we can audit or have our clients audit their recovery box, audit their stress, audit their sleep, and audit their diet, then they can reduce this box by 50%, which is huge. So if I was to parallel it, I'm going to draw more on this side. So anatomical dysfunction, we can't change that because we can't change what happened in the past. We can't change how you were born or anything like that. So that's going to always stay the same. So this box would stay the same height. This box, I said they can reduce up to 50%. So that would come down to here. Functional diagnosis, as you start to work with them over the weeks with their program, say their knee flexion improves, say their range of motion in their shoulder flexion or shoulder abduction, whatever it is that you're working on that pertains to them, this box will start to reduce because they are gaining more ranges of motion. So I'll make that box even a little smaller. So that's functional diagnosis. This is recovery. Unfortunately, we are not magicians. We can't change someone's home life or their work life, but we can just have them manage whatever is going on in their day-to-day. So home and work. And as you can see, as opposed to this much room in their capacity, they now have just gained way more room. Where, say, okay, Daniel comes in and does his lunges, feels okay. He does his presses, his back is okay. Oh, he even got the kettlebell swings in, and guess what? We didn't go over the capacity line. Now, our job as coaches is throughout the weeks is to increase that load, increase their capacity so they can get stronger. So over time, we want to challenge that capacity line in a safe manner, but we always want to revert back down to here, and it always is going to come back to the recovery box. So making sure that we are either referring out when we need to. If you notice when you do a check-in with them, you're just downing coffee and you're eating McDonald's every day, we have functional nutritionists you can work with, refer out. Their sleep, informing them how important sleep hygiene is, whether that is getting more sleep, what is your sleep hygiene like, but what is your sleep routine like, whether that's before you go to bed or even when you wake up in the morning. Do you have time for yourself, whether that's listening to a podcast, music, meditation, anything like that. And then also stress management as well. Because as much as how beneficial exercise is, it's also an added stressor on our body. So sometimes, making them do a bunch of work could be doing more harm than good for them. So this is load versus capacity, pretty much in a nutshell. What questions do we have about this? Comments? Can anyone relate to this?
Yeah, I think it's really important for the trainer to be aware of that recovery box. I think it would be really helpful for you guys.
Jeff, do you have any tips or recommendations in terms of any subjective or rather objective measurements for the recovery section? Like, how are we gauging that?
Yeah, so the one thing that I find really beneficial is when I start each session. I mean, you guys know your clients. Hopefully you can gauge their personality type, and You can tell when someone walks through the door, you're like, all right, like Bob is really ticked off today, or like they're in a good mood. So notice their body language. How's their energy in when they're walking through the door? But I always do a check-in with them where I just ask them, hey, how many hours of sleep have you gotten last night? What's your energy level at? And I use a scale from 1 to 5. I'll ask them, what's your muscle soreness at on a scale from 1 to 5? And then I'll also ask them just how's your water intake been and what's your appetite been like, depending on the time of day. If it's really early, maybe they haven't eaten that much, but to be mindful of, hey, how are we tracking our water throughout the day if that's something that they aren't really doing. And then I always ask on a scale from 1 to 10, what is your stress level at right now? So repetition would be the one thing that I do. They already know when I see them, they're like, stress is at this. Yep, my energy's at this. So it becomes repetition. And hopefully they take that into their day-to-day outside of here as well and apply that even into their routines throughout life. Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Anything else?